After a strong start, at least in Super Rugby and kind of in the MLR, kind of a disappointing downer week, something to be expected, a little bit of a lull, but also with no real news this week. Let's kind of go into a condensed format for today. Let's get into it.
I need all the wins, yeah. Ain't no L's, I gotta get a no call and quits, yeah. Gotta keep on moving no matter how hard.
Here comes Danny Tusizawa, back to Baker, Baker with the fin. Kurt Baker in for DC, and this may well do it old glory with the try. The New Zealand Sevens legend, Kurt Baker with the cherry on top.
Can you believe it?
Welcome back to the On the Line Rugby podcast, a show brought to you by the Believe Sports Network. I'm your host, Micah Nagaishi, and welcome back. I guess we'll just start off with Super Rugby round 4. You know, I was really hoping that this week, given the kind of marquee matchups that we were expecting, like a lot of do or die rounds, that, you know, really you would have had some upsets, a little bit of razzle dazzle flair, perhaps. I don't know. But unfortunately, we didn't really get a lot of it. A lot of it across the board and across really the globe, actually, was a lot more defensive battles. I think that if you look at the way the game has been moving in terms of offense, I think this is good for the game to have a little bit more defensive struggles in the trenches. You know, obviously that's what real rugby has been all about. But I think it definitely lended itself to a slower, less action-packed week by the average fan's perspective. I guess we'll start off with the first one that I was really hoping would be a barnstormer of a game, that the Canes should have blew up the Crusaders, but unfortunately didn't. I'm not sure if it was played in the wet, simply just because there was knocks galore on both sides. You know, the Satyrs obviously have not really been it this year, so I kind of should have expected that. But as for the Canes, like, Roygaard wasn't throwing these miracle passes. A lot of these were very measured, average velocity balls, at least in terms of their talent standpoint, and it was just all over the park with that one. Obviously the Satyrs had really good defense. You know, they really stepped it up, I think, today. Well, not today, but Saturday. Just because, you know, the likes of Ruben Love, Josh Morby had a couple runs, but a lot of them were brought back. They just couldn't really move the way they wanted to. And I think that's what the Crusaders of old have done. And that should be the standard for this game for the Satyrs moving forward on defense. Obviously, a lot of it came off the back of Sevu Reece. Personally, he would have been my MVP with Zach Gallagher and some of the Crusaders bench. Just because, you know, for Sevu Reece, who I personally don't really like as a person and kind of as an athlete, just to have the ability to really step up where needed, to not only shut down kicks, make key tackles, force turnovers immediately after that. You just got to give credit where credit's due. Sevu really did a good job in really stopping a lot of, for example, Josh Morby and Ruben Love's attempts at the goal line, even if it was long or short. The Canes just really weren't on it. Maybe they took their foot off the gas, who knows, but it was a tight struggle, a lot tighter than what I expected. Obviously Cameron really managed the game really well, space-wise. I think he was forced more into a larger role with Ruben Love exiting at around the 55th to 60th minute mark, simply just because of an ankle injury. A lot of people are commenting on Reddit and Twitter that it's a re-aggravation of his groin. I really don't think so. If you look at the way he fell when he took that high ball and Keenan Oholo kind of basically misread the communication and almost dumped him on himself, it looked to be he landed a little awkwardly and then took his subsequent phase into contact with not the greatest of footwork stance and just positioning. So, obviously it could be a 1 week thing. It could be a 5 week thing if it's really bad. I personally think it's just an ankle sprain. I think if Ruben Love is Ruben Love, he will come back next week and play. But obviously, if you really wanted to rest it, he could be out for 5 weeks. You really did notice it, obviously, when he was running around after that, around the 48th minute mark, just because, his hampered mobility, he wasn't taking the ball into contact as much. He was passing it a lot more. He wasn't looking for a lot of his dummy lines that he normally is known to do and patented to run. I do think that really hurt the Canes when it comes to overall attacking, just because in the opening of that second half, when that happened, I think it could have been really any man's game. Excuse me, that the Satyrs had really pushed themselves into the point of being on the back foot again for once in the game. And if they wanted to strike, the Canes should have. And unfortunately, I think really hampering their basic lead of attack obviously did something to them. And when you look at a Brett Cameron, who I still think is more of a Alex Smith level game manager, he'll put guys in good positions. He'll put his team in good positions, but I don't think you're ever going to see him becoming the catalyst to winning a game. I think the jury's still out on that for me. I would have to watch a little bit more games to see that. But obviously, Cameron, hats off to you still. You still did a good job managing the space with Ruben Love basically hampered for 20 minutes. I'm surprised, honestly, that they didn't take him out earlier than that. Perhaps they wanted to leave him in to see if he could last that long, or to see if he could draw more defenses away from Keeney and friends. But the Crusaders were all over them. Gang tackles abound. And I think it just shows up with how Rob Penny really brought his team to play. Obviously, like I said, the biggest impact was really Severis, but obviously we can't forget Zach Gallagher. Obviously to come off of that injury in place for Scott Barrett, who will be out, I believe, till playoffs if the Crusaders make it, with a fractured finger. You look across the board, Gallagher, like Sevu, was all over the park on most plays. He really helped disrupt the Satyrs line out and the Canes just because of their rhythm, between having them forced to be interfered in the air, great play at the breakdown, and great stops on goal line D. The Canes had every opportunity to make this a blowout game. They didn't execute on them and really properly take it. Obviously, like I said, a lot of it deals with injury, but guys like that really stepped up and came to play. So I can't really knock them on that. Obviously, the penalties late on Owen Franks and company screwed the Satyrs. They honestly could have had that game. You could argue after Ruben Love left, or after he got hurt in those 8 or so minutes, that the Satyrs really took it upon themselves to really imprint themselves onto the game. And then with the bench of Owen Franks and friends coming on, it really helps cement that at scrum and set piece. But you just can't be doing a lot of the stuff that Owen Franks was doing, and especially with that yellow card late on the goal line, which honestly, in my opinion, should have been a penalty try. It virtually was theirs. Brett Cameron, if you give him a little bit of a piece off the tee, I think he'll do a good job, and he really helped cement this win, despite the fact the momentum was virtually theirs. I think we saw that, at least in that regard, a lot over this weekend across not only Super Rugby, but across the globe in general. And we'll discuss that a little bit more as the show goes on. But I just wasn't impressed overall at this game. I think both teams have a lot to work on. I definitely think that the Satyrs came out morally, to me, as the victor, and strategically. The Canes need to go back to the drawing board, especially with Ruben Love possibly being out for over a month. So that's something to look into for them in that regard. As for the Chiefs, I really thought that was a slop fest of a match. It was only really handled by ALB and DMAC very well. I would say outside of those two guys and maybe Sean Stevenson, you weren't really seeing a lot of forward movement of the ball and quality carry, just in terms of both teams between them and the Drua. Obviously the Chiefs played more like the Drua for whatever reason. I'm not sure why they thought that would work. Perhaps it would be more along the lines of, obviously, with the Drua being more of a shooter defense, where they're just going to come up to you in your face and try to force you to make plays. Maybe they thought they could repatent, but better, in Joshua Weissman-esque style, the Drua's playbook. But unfortunately, you just can't do it. You have talent. I'm not going to take that away from you. The Chiefs have light years talent better than the Drua in terms of scheme and overall experience, but athletic prowess, you're not beating the Drua. And it's just like, I'm not going to say it's in their being, but it's pretty damn close to that. Like, if you look at the way the Drua play, that's more natural to them. The Chiefs just really looked like they were trying to do great value and ended up screwing it up. I really think that they should have kept to what their original brand was. I thought that it would have lent itself to a lot better play against the Fijian opposition, who normally is not the most not only disciplined but very well conditioned to end the game in the same way that they start. So you had options. I'm not sure what was going through Clayton McMillan and friends' mind in that regard, but I think it's something to really dig deep on and look at themselves in the mirror at this match. Yes, they won, but at what cost? Obviously, finally, Iosefo Masi unhooks the trailer and finally starts scoring. I was personally, as a fantasy investor into him, really expected him to be that guy and step up for the losses of Ravovo and friends, but I think so far this season, it's mostly been Ravu Taumanda and those boys. And I was really not expecting to see Masi really hampered, almost too skittish and happy feet at the gain line. And on top of that, not really completing the passes and offloads that he normally is patented to do, at least for the last 2 to 3 years. And it's been kind of disappointing. But for him to score 2 tries in almost rapid fashion, and the first one with his line break, which was beautiful, by the way, it looked vintage. And I hope to see more of that the rest of this season. Obviously, Masi is one of still the most dynamically athletic players in this league, and he can do a lot with not only ball in hand but out of the ball on defense, and he really enforced his will this game, and I hope to see that moving forward. I still would say, though, that the Drua continue to put themselves on the back foot with breakdown and set piece penalties. That is going to be the thing that can screw them when it comes to the playoffs. It was the thing that really brought them down last year. It's the thing that brought them down in the World Cup. They need to somehow find a coach or consultant, at least in that regard, that needs to keep them measured. Just because when you're giving so much opponents, especially DMAC, off the tee and opportunities to have tap and go ball, to kick for touch and allow the Chiefs' normal set piece dominance, quote unquote, not really anymore, to play out, you're not going to get a lot of opportunities to really play the patented Fijian ball. It's mostly going to be a panic, and that's mostly what they've been playing through all this season, and it really showed. Obviously, I think no one can forget the ALB injury. I thought it was borderline Sam Kane level, where he was, with the way and magnitude that it was, he wasn't moving. They had to bring out the cart for him. Very glad to see that he was just a concussion, not a broken neck. Very good. And that he was able to walk semi-normally out onto the field, obviously shake hands with players and celebrate with the rest of his teammates. But I think we'd be not measured but conservative to say that he'll be out for the next 2 weeks at least, minimum. ALB has seen a lot of concussions over his career, especially in the last couple of years, and I definitely think that they need to rest him those couple of weeks. Obviously, you have Daniel Rona Romeka Pohimpe. You obviously have Quinn Tupaya, which magically came off and played extremely well. I think for all our Subaru fans, I think he got 8.5 points, if I'm not mistaken. I definitely think that he should be in the field more. When him and ALB both played together in the limited time when Tupaya came off the bench, it really showed where the Chiefs could be. Perhaps they're trying to throw out a little bit more younger talent just to kind of blood them a little bit more and see where they can go, with obviously Tupaya still being on a obvious pitch count, but definitely not with ALB down. I think they're really going to have to step up and really throw Tupaya in and just say, hey, go to the Wolves. I understand your physical limitations, but team needs you. Nut up or shut up. I think that's going to be the name of the game for them that moving forward. And the Chiefs, I think, need to take a long look in the mirror, just like the Canes, and say what went wrong and how can we really turn this around, just because it really wasn't that entertaining and not that great in terms of on-brand Chiefs play. As for the Blues and Taz, is my last game I watched for that. I was very impressed with Darren Coleman and Tane Edmonds' inventive play calls and fierce rush defense by the Taz the entire time, stifling the attack by the Blues on the edge. Mark Talea didn't really get the kind of action he normally gets. Zarn Sullivan basically scored a gimme try because Mark Nawani Tawase was being lazy, and we'll talk about that in a little bit. All their tries were relatively from the Blues were gimmies and handouts by the Waratahs. they put themselves in those positions, obviously, and I definitely think that they're still 2 steps away from being where they can be. Their ceiling is still very high. I would still argue next to the Reds, they're jockeying for that first place if they manage to turn this around. Obviously, it's still early. I know there's about 10 to 15 more rounds left in Super Rugby, but a lot of people are writing them off, and I don't think that that's right, just because you see what they have on display. You have Tane Edmund finally growing to be that dog. I really wasn't expecting him to do the things he did on defense, between blowing up fools on the attack. I think he stopped a couple good phases off a set piece. And then obviously his huge stop as a set piece cover on the line out instead of the 9, Jay Gordon being there. Tana Edmund needs to be there. He was dragging fools in the touch. I'm very impressed with that. And, I think this was a game where Mark Nawani Tawase really showed his double-edged sword with the way he plays. Yes, Nawani Tawase is a freak athletically. And yes, if you give him space, he will destroy you. But I think his decision-making, a lot of the times, at least this season, needs to be highlighted. I've talked about it before. He makes very bad business decisions for whatever reason. Perhaps it's self-preservation, perhaps not. But if he did a little bit more, honestly, he could be better. We'll take a look at this opening try that he gave to Zarn Sullivan. He refused to communicate on the shift. He then stands wide outside of the B-man, which would be their number 2 guy on the breakdown on the blind side, and refused to call for support. First off, you're putting yourself without a mark. You're marking a space, in a very empty space in between the Blues attack. Second, you're not calling for support. And 3, you're leaving massive gaps on either side. The most you could do is, at least, if you're going to do that, at least go kind of tighter. I don't know. Mark a man, anything? No, perhaps not. I may not be as talented as you, but I think IQ needs to be there as a pro athlete, making that kind of money. But such is life. And then on top of that, you choose to, if this hits your hand, become a penalty try because you chose to one hand try to swat it and just fall forward instead of, I don't know, maybe taking a bad angle hit on Zarn Sullivan, at least fiending like you're gonna do something on defense. I think that's another thing that really disgusted me really on that play. I think Zarn Sullivan should not have scored that try. I think he easily could have been pushed out if they just called for more support and or Nawani Tawase at least held it up or pushed it out. He obviously has the power to do so, but just not executing. Then on top of that, the try that he had disallowed that pushed them, that could have put them over the top, really, what was really Nawani Tawase's fault. If you look at that play, when the line break happens, all he has is Mark Talea about maybe 15 yards away to his left and about 5 yards deep. And he had Steven Perofeta obviously trying to mark both him and the wing. When you look at that play, like the commentator said, Tim Horn was totally correct on this. He threw the ball way too early. The most you could have did is maybe dummy it, and then already Perofeta is leaning with his hips in that direction, like he knows you're going to go that way. Dummy it, and then force yourself to make a play through Mark Talea. I understand Talea is fast, but you're just as fast. You're Mark Nawani Tawase. Do something with your legs, make something happen. And if he does tackle you, on the slight chance that he does, you are still in a better position than when passing it to the wing early and leaving him a narrow window. Perofeta is no joke when it comes to IQ. He's going to be there and set himself up for these kind of situations to really put himself in the best position to make that play. Obviously, he did. I really think that if that dummy was done, at least he could have gained another 10 or 15 meters before Talea didn't maybe manage to make a tackle, but then he would at least have the offload opportunity to then come off of that and feed off to the wing and maybe have a better chance of getting that score. I think that score chance would have went down to like 5%, given that when he did that. But I definitely think that it would have went up a good percentage. I'm not going to say over 50-50, but I definitely think it would have been in that 45 to 55 range to at least say, hey, we have a better chance. This is more of a markable opportunity for us to imprint our right on the game. And obviously between that and a stifling defense that was constantly on the back foot, the Toss are just one step away. Like, I don't think people realize that. Yeah, the record doesn't show it, but if you look at it, they're just like the Jackals who are turning it around this year. Yes, the Taz have really put their mark this year, just like the Rebels, but come on, man. Like, you got to move those little inch markers. I understand it's early. I understand there's a lot to work on. I think Darren Coleman is going to stay, I hope. If you look at the way the margins are, the players are playing for him very well. If you look at the way he's devising the game plans, I'm really impressed by that. And the second half adjustments have been insane. I think it's just, like I said, it's a game of inches, it's a game of margins, it's a game of decisions. And if your players can't really execute on those opportunities with front football, I really don't know what to tell you. And like I always say, Rugby Australia, specifically the New South Wales Rugby Union, would be pretty stupid to fire him unless they get someone better. I don't know how or who they would get, but they would need to get someone better, given that. So, but let's move up a little bit north to our northern counterparts in the Six Nations. The only real game I watched was Scotland versus Ireland. I really thought that the Scots deserved that win. I'm an Irish fan, and even I can say that it was pretty impressive as a defensive player to see that showcase on the field. It was really a masterclass by Scotland and Gregor Townsend to really shut down that Irish attack. You know, they were really holding it down despite only having really less than 1/3 of the possession. They missed only less than 10% of their tackles. I believe it was in the 7 to 8% range, and they won the breakdown consistently. Normally, that's an Irish thing to really do, and win penalties at the breakdown, to set up off a set piece and dominate in the physicality department. The Scots did it and did it well, and they didn't really need a lot of gang tackles. Yes, at the end they did, but for basically not having the ball for less than 20% of the game, I think it was a damn good effort by them. I think it's that cover defense that really slowed them down. Obviously Ireland can rip roar around the meter department, but they're not getting much out of it. Like, if you look at a couple of their scores, they let James Lowe run it a little bit, then he gets stopped. They let Gary Ringrose do that, and then he ran into touch. They covered the edge extremely well and forced them to rip roar in between the tackles, in between the hashes, and force that physical ball that I don't think Ireland was really looking for. I really think that they wanted to finesse their way past Scotland, and nothing really happened in that. I do have to admit, though, Ireland's defense of Duhan van der Merwe was exceptional. A lot of the plays, specifically from Calvin Nash and friends, really helped stop him with shooting tactics. They were very measured with that. They didn't overdo it, which is really nice to see. But they can obviously, do a lot worse with Duhan on the field, and they put one of the fastest guys in the world in his place. Hey, props. I think Matt Carley was a little boof on that regard in some things. I think he was a little too enthusiastic with the whistle. I've said it in the World Cup. I'll say it again. When you look at Carley's calls, some of them were like, why just let them play on? Some of the calls, like, for example, Finn Russell's forward knock did not even look forward. I would call it backwards if it was a game that I was watching. I think even the commentators knew it. Ugo Monye even commentated on it. It's just something to really look into. I think perhaps this year has seen a lot of good young up and coming refs come into the spot and really show out. But it seems that the old guard is really not looking that great. I don't know, for whatever reason. Especially going back to Scotland, I think I have to give man of the match to Andy Christie, Hugh Jones, and Matt Fagerson, and Xander Fagerson. All those guys led the most terrific stops and led the line on defense. The entire game, they were there in every play, making plays in every breakdown, stopping, calling out Ireland's attack, helping people get to their mark, setting up the line, shooting up together. And for Hugh Jones, scoring really the only few tries that they had and setting up the rest. Those have to be my men of the matches. I was really impressed by that. Obviously, Robbie Henshaw shooting the gap really helped Hugh Jones score that early. Because of that, he left Tog Byrne and Josh Van der Fleer in a really bad spot to really try to put themselves in a position to make that tackle. Obviously, James Lowe tried to cover it from the edge, but when you're at that bad of an angle and you have to cover 15, 20 meters off the field to then move into the hashes and try to stop him, It's not going to happen. Hugh Jones is a powerful dude, and even if he did try, he probably would have barreled that through. But boiling down to it, Scotland had a serious shot, I think, after that Hugh Jones try. I really think they had a serious issues with knocks on late. I really think that they could have made something do in that 90 to 100 seconds that they had left with the ball. And they left a lot of bad food on the table, really, in terms of scoring opportunities. And that's really it for what I had to take away from that game. Let's move a little west to domestic rugby. I'm not gonna lie, these games are kind of hard to watch. But I did take away 5 things from this weekend that I think need to be talked about a little bit more. So let's get into it. Really, the top look like pretenders outside of the Seawolves and the MLR. I think this is honest. And this kind of goes into my other point that we'll talk about later. With San Diego, everyone thought that they were going to be the historic team to really, or at one point, go undefeated last year and win a final, and then run it back this year with the signings that they had, like Matt Giddo, Lincoln McClutchy, and friends. We haven't seen Matt Giddo. We haven't really seen what Lincoln McClutchy can do. Yes, he came in this game. I think this was his first start of the year. We'll probably see more of him moving forward, but it was more measured. It wasn't the Lincoln McClutchy we saw at Moana Pacifica. It wasn't the Lincoln McClutchy we saw at Counties Monaco. It's a different player. And when you look down the line at where he could go, I feel like this MLR drop has kind of stifled him in terms of the way that they play. Obviously, the play style of the MLR is obviously different from the Super Rugby, where you're playing with space and width. I think it's more of a combination of the downhill from the URC and Premiership and a little bit of wide play, but mostly downhill play. And I think that's really slowed down his development and stunted him as a person. If you look at Houston, a lot of their plays, despite being kind of a Houston apologist, I'm not going to lie, they haven't really translated the momentum they had last year into this year. It's a lot of knock-ons, a lot of bad set piece play outside of a couple good mauls. They're keeping a lot of games tight that they really shouldn't, and it leaves a lot to be desired on that table. Chicago, another team. This really goes into my second point on this. Really, free agency hasn't really panned out. You could argue they won free agency early in the year, with signs like Dave Kearney, Nate Osberger, all those boys. They basically rebuilt the entire team. They gutted that team from last year that was unmistakably trash, and they rebuilt that squad. And it's the same problems, if not worse. They're having tackles, missed tackle opportunities. Yes, they fixed a little bit of set piece, but Dylan Fawcett doesn't look the same. He doesn't look the same from New England. He doesn't look the same from any point in his MLR career. Nate Osberger had a couple good moments, but he looks pedestrian. Billy Meeks at 10 is not it. Someone needs to put him back at 12, 13. Move Bryce Campbell back in, get Luke Hardy in. I don't know what happened with him. For some reason, maybe he lost the job to Billy Meeks. I don't know how the hell that happened, but it's things to look into. And that's sad as a Hounds fan, to really see your team flounder despite having so much talent again on paper. I mean, even the first year, they had talent on paper to be in the top 4 roster in the league. Julian Dominguez doesn't look the same either. Come on, what happened? Someone fix this. I told you it was either going to be blow up the roster or blow up the staff. And both needed to happen. I think now, looking back, hindsight 2020, I know it's only round 3. It's still early, but this is not a good benchmark for the rest of the year. And for most of the teams that went through free agency, they made the worst out of it. I really think now that Dallas has won free agency with the way that they've played, especially in the coaching department. This is my second point, that really Nate Osborne's turnaround in the Jackal should be celebrated. I think he should be coach of the year. Obviously with Mario Ledesma and friends still being on that roster, you were obviously going to expect that forward dominance. And I think versus Anthem, who, yes, I understand, is not the most disciplined and is not the greatest in fundamentals. It's a lot of rookies. It's a lot of younger players that honestly should be more in development squads. But for Dallas to put on that kind of clinic and it looked virtually Old Glory-esque is something to behold. You're bringing in, as I've said earlier, the most experienced head coach who was the head coach in the NOLA Gold. He brought Old Glory's attack I think he's learned a little bit from Kurt Baker in terms of what he needs to bring on top of that off the field to really build that culture, and I can really see it. Despite Dallas kind of getting gutted to Miami and really to San Diego with losing Danny Christensen, this team looks great. I'm very impressed with them, and I can really see them building off of this victory, which was obviously an understandable blowout, into better things. And that's an impressive thing to say for a Dallas team that at one point was the laughing stock of the league until last year. Very impressed. It feels like kind of put podium off of this, I guess. I feel like we have to give Anthem another 2 to 3 years. But I think it's hard to say how much patience we should give them, because yes, I think they need to gel together, and I think that they should deserve to get that 2 to 3 years really going. You know, obviously a lot of these coaches come from the U23 mark, not from my era, unfortunately, but from the years after, and perhaps they need to just build their identity and build their steam. They have shown moments of brilliance. I just think that they need to somehow translate that. I think the only hard thing, this is why I leave that caveat at the end, is a lot of these guys are on loan for just this year. I'm not sure if they're going to be on loan again next year. Nothing's guaranteed. So if you're looking at how this team could be built, it's going to be hard to build continuity, chemistry, and develop your culture if you're constantly shuffling between players. I'm sure next year with the draft, they're going to make some more moves as well, but it could go either way. I think they're leaning more towards the gamble side of this than they are winning this deal, but something the World Rugby and USA has to learn and lose growing pains with. I think my last point really is that NOLA really could make their MLR final. I think we saw the MLR final with NOLA versus New England. That was the only game I could really stomach to watch this weekend. I was very impressed. NOLA with Rodney Iona and Carlos Spencer's leadership have really showed where they can be as a team. I think they battled really the Free Jacks on every department very well. I think the only thing that sets them apart is their lack of real structure on the back line. I mean, they have Iona and friends, but they were winning a lot off of the breakdown and a lot through their forward play. Yes, they had a couple good plays out of Iona kicking and managing space. I think that was great. But I think if you look across the board with the Free Jacks, they're a lot more structured and in line with where you expect a team of that caliber to be. I think that's what NOLA aspires to be. And you can kind of tell that they're kind of leaning in that direction with that physicality on D and that way that they play their offense. But I think they're only one step away really from taking that away. Those 2 missed kicks by Iona are going to haunt them. They had the game in the bag, I would say, relatively speaking, for majority of the match. And I think it was nice to see a little bit of Julian Roberts kind of running amok in that unstructured play. I wasn't exactly happy to see him on the wing. I've said it once, I'll say it again. He deserves to have a spot at that 10 or 12 spot, but I think Iona, deservedly so, needs to stay with the effort that he's playing with this year. But that's going to be really it for me this week, guys. Thanks so much for coming in, and I will see you next week. Peace.